Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this event. Great to see you all here. Nice big crowd for this start of our Solana education series and the start of Encode Solana-based activities. Hopefully we can explain lots of things to you and be ready to take things to the next level. If you do want to tweet about this, I highly recommend, because we will retweet. There are a couple of accounts that might be of interest. I personally, if you tag me, and second of all, we have Encode's Twitter. If you tag either of those, I will make sure a retweet is forthcoming. But we'll get going, guys, in another minute or two. Do put in chat where you are from. Always good to see the diversity of locations at Encode's events. Also, guys, we have many different, I'll talk about this properly, but we have many different opportunities to get involved with various things at Encode. If you are looking to get a job or just some career advice, do ping Laura. Her Twitter is here. You can also find her on the Discord, of which Steve will post in a moment or so. This event is recorded and will go up on our YouTube channel tomorrow, alongside my slides and some associated materials. This event is meant for everyone. I try to keep these events nice and accessible and capable of being understood by anyone. We do go into the technical weeds to keep everything interesting, but this event is an 8-event series where we'll cover various different aspects of being involved with the Solana ecosystem and learning about Solana that you can put to test. And hopefully we'll have a hackathon component soon after. And ZZ is also tweeted out. Well done, ZZ. So keep the tweets coming, guys, and we'll make sure you get a retweet. So let me share my screen. Welcome, everyone, to this Encode Solana introduction. We're going to take you through all the main parts of Solana, a bit of a taste of what's to come, and give you hopefully a few things to learn for the future. What's in store? 8 events. 8 events on various different aspects of the Solana ecosystem, ranging from technical to non-technical. Hopefully it'll give you a good basis. They happen every week at this time slot, and they are all recorded though. I always find it's best to attend these events face to face, simply because you'll actually watch them and you can ask questions, and it's I always find if I try and watch things retrospectively, I always find something else to do instead. So invest in your learning, come along every week. You will be invited. You don't need to necessarily sign up. You're invited on the calendar to make sure that they are there. A few words on what Encode Club is. A lot of you probably come to this from Encode, but also might be very much new to Encode. So Encode, we are a Web3 education community. What this means is we train talent through great programs. This is a workshop series. We do coding boot camps. We've just talked about hackathons, accelerators, and the end goal is to help you learn in whatever aspect of to whatever end you have, but hopefully get a job, which we mentioned to Laura, get funding. We have a dedicated investment fund and network of investors, over 60 companies, funding companies out of Encode in the last few years. Omji from our team handles all of the funding side, but we really want to help you kind of nurture your talent and go on to do great things and get involved in the Web3 space. But the ultimate goal is we're here to learn and build together. There's no race here. We're all trying to, well, there's a race for you in a general sense to get to the next stage of your career and come into Web3, but we're learning and building together, and we hope you make friends and partners and fellow hackers and in this program and in your time at Encode, and go on to do many great things. All of these things you can do. You can get exposure to new trends, you can learn to code, you can build hackathon projects, you can launch startups, you can get a job. All of these things you can do whilst at Encode, and everything is free and global. This event is online to everyone. There are no barriers to entry. Sometimes if it's a highly selective program where we can't offer it to everyone, like the Bootcamp or Accelerator, we do have to take applications. But for events like this, and for much of the content we produce, it is free and available online to anyone at any point. But today it's about Solana, and I will try and give as general overview as possible. Hopefully whet the appetite a bit about why you should be excited, about Solana, as because there very much is a lot of excitement. And if you have any questions, chat is the best way to go, and I'll try and cover them. If they naturally fit in with what I'm saying, I'll cover them straight away, or in the near future with slides. Otherwise, I'll wait to the end to cover everything. Disclaimer, I'd say this is a really short introduction. At most, will go for an hour, and a moose-boosh of sorts. So please, if I've missed anything, we will cover it in future weeks, or you can shout at me. So let's go straight into it. So what is Solana? In the most basic sense, it is an open source project implementing a high performance permissionless blockchain. Now this sounds very specific and very general, and also kind of describes most blockchains. So I want to kind of move away from that into something more concrete. But what you should know is there is fervent developer activity around Solana. Anyone that went to a Breakpoint in Lisbon last year will know this. There are tons of projects, tons of developers all getting involved in Solana. So there's clearly some momentum there, and I don't think there is smoke without fire. There's also fervent investor activity. And I think most of the projects I've invested in personally have been Solana-based projects recently. So and maybe that is some indicator, but I think that applies to most people really. So fervent activity. So why is this activity there? I think first to understand where Solana fits, we have to look at blockchain theory a little bit, and why we're doing this in the first place. In general, with blockchains, we kind of, why they exist is a weird question. Sometimes the answer is simply speculation, but in the most kind of optimistic sense, blockchains are about trying to do more things more efficiently for activities that involve a lot of people. Now that sounds super general and super vague. So let's go a little bit more specific. We want to remove the need for centralized forces where possible. Again, this starts to sound extremely anarchistic, so let's go even further. Let's talk about centralization. Centralization can be a good thing, but it can also be a source of things we don't like: censorship, points of failure, inefficiency, slow speed of change. And blockchain really is about removing centralization in a technological context. Of course, you can make bigger arguments on the non-technological side, but I don't think that is for. So again, this sounds vague, but let's go more specifically. We're trying to basically build decentralized databases and distributed systems that can be far more efficient digital institutions. And we want to be able to all open. Again, still sounds really esoteric. So let's talk about money. So money is fundamentally a database. If we look at the history of money, money effectively originally starts with barter. Like, I have a cow, Steve has a pig, I swap this cow for a pig. Great. Now this is great until the point at which you have to kind of do stuff that requires chopping up a pig, and that really kind of defeats the object of a pig. If you know 1 cow equals 2 pigs, or 1 cow equals 3 pigs, or 1 cow equals 0.6 pigs, things start to go a bit awry. So we need some sort of medium of exchange, and historically money would be anything: coins, rocks in the ocean, I don't know, stars in the sky, anything that I think I can at least say or claim I own and I can use as a medium. It really helps to have gold coins. Gold coins are great, or some coin, something I can physically exchange. And problem is with that is eventually things become so expensive that I can't carry around all the gold coins in the world. Maybe there aren't enough gold coins. So we start to have the idea of money as something digital. Someone says I have money, but I don't need to physically carry around with us. Looks like a bank. Banks are great. The problem with banks is that, and digital money is what goes on inside a bank. How are we even measuring that I have 1 million coins and Steve has 1 trillion coins? How do we do that? They actually maintain a spreadsheet. That's what happens in a bank in the background. This will be recorded to the person who mentioned it in chat. It's effectively a spreadsheet. They keep a list that Anthony has this much, Steve has this much, Laura has this much, and that when we trade, that I have, let's say I send $10 to Laura, I have $10 less and Laura has $10 more. Fantastic, great. This spreadsheet is maintained mainly by central banks, fundamentally, but every bank has a copy. And if we look at Russia, for a really good example, they were kicked out of SWIFT, which is basically just a big spreadsheet system for maintaining or for communicating between banks about money transfers, a big ledger. Now, if money is a database, then it kind of needs a central authority to kind of maintain that, someone in charge of the spreadsheet. But the first kind of the way Bitcoin comes about, which you probably all know, is what if we replace the central authority with code? Do we actually need to have someone who's in charge of this spreadsheet? Could it all run? Could we all maybe have a copy of it? Could we all agree on a digital system to update it? This is basically what blockchain technology tries to do. And Bitcoin is very much the first iteration of this. It is a decentralized currency where you keep a ledger not in one with one central party, but everyone has a copy of it. And we have some complicated cryptographic system to change this ledger and shout and tell everyone that it has been changed. Bitcoin has big problems. It's really slow. It's quite expensive. But what it is it allows you to transfer Bitcoin. I mean, whether or not we give this thing value is a different aspect, but it allows you to transfer from peer to peer. There is no centralized force. No one can stop you taking part in the Bitcoin network. Anyone can own it. It's permissionless. Anyone can trade it. These are good qualities, at least cool qualities, even if they are not optimal quality. But of course, we want to go a step further, and this is an event about Solana. So we might want to take this like peer-to-peer digital money and go further. But we might want to add logic, additional functionality to this. If we've got this digital money, can we add if-then statements? If Laura sends Steve money, send Anthony money as the most simple one. What about things like lending products, saving products? Like we can really start to build applications that have digital money kind of built in. And this is dApps, and these are smart contracts, self-executing code, which is Ethereum. And hopefully you're all here, everyone here knows about Ethereum. What I've said so far is merely a refresher and a stating of assumptions rather than saying things that are completely new. And if they are new, ping me and I'll happily explain them to you in a more slow, digestible way. But Ethereum is a smart contract platform. It's a blockchain. If we go all the way back to what we were talking about before, Ethereum kind of meets these conditions as well, like a permissionless blockchain that, I mean, high performance is the key word there, but an open source project implementing a permissionless blockchain that can be a decentralized ledger, but also can have allow you to build applications on it based on logic around moving money. And that can really be as basic as if this, then that. Now, the problem with Ethereum, for anyone that's tried it, is again, it's also slow. It's expensive at times. Sometimes, really, if we go to the kind of the peak, I mean, we might as well share the screen here. If I go to gas now, it can get really expensive. Like these are times when the network, again, every network will be challenged, but there are times at which things can go a little bit kind of crazy. I might just stop sharing my screen for a second because I managed to lose my presentation slides. But look, it can get very expensive, and even if we look now, and I think things are broadly under control, it's still going to cost you $50 to do a transaction, and some people's transaction itself might be like much less than $50. So this seems inefficient. If you want to borrow USDC on the compound, it's $70. So this, look at this. If you want to use Tornado Cash, which different story, $200. These are expensive things to do. But what comes next after Ethereum? Like smart contracts are great. You're probably familiar with great dApps and all these things. But what if we want to do it? I'm not going to say better. I'm going to say different, because better I think is subjective in this context. And we're ultimately searching for this kind of, there's many features we care about, but ultimately we're searching for this holy grail between scalability, security, and decentralization. We want to make it fast, accessible, scalable, secure, and more than just transactions, right? And Ethereum is not, again, this is all relative, but the layer 2 efforts kind of show Ethereum is not fast and scalable. It might satisfy these other things, but it is not fast and scalable. And they tend to be linked. The speed at which you can move is kind of also linked to how scalable you are. Kind of inversely, kind of also completely linked. But why is it so slow? I mean, one of the many reasons is that it's actually quite hard to keep lots of different nodes and individuals in sync. Like what we're trying to do with blockchain is eventually create a network that has millions of people taking part of it, that relies on millions of people to trade it and also to kind of maintain it through things like mining, which you may or may not know about. And keeping everyone in sync and reaching this thing called consensus, like agreeing what's happening at any one period of time, is hard. Specifically, it's hard because you need to have a unified idea of time. You need to have every node needs to agree that this is happening in this order. Because the moment you don't have that, you might end up with situations where different nodes have different ideas of who has what money. And the worst case scenario for this is something called double spending. if Laura can spend her money twice, her money is worthless, or money begins to be worthless on the network. Maybe she can get away with it for 5 minutes, but the network will quickly realize something's going wrong. And in this case, money tends to not have any value at all. So let's go to a history lesson. Now we can really start to talk about Solana. So in November 2017, Anatoly Yakovenko, who is one of the founders of Solana, published a white paper. In this white paper, he introduced the concept of proof of history. Proof of history is effectively a clock, which makes network synchronization very simple and therefore very fast. A unified clock. And again, we're not going to try going too much into the weeds. We've got technical events next week and following that we can go into this. But effectively, the innovation was having a clock that everyone kind of shares that allows us to kind of have a clear sense of order of transactions. Bitcoin and Ethereum don't have clocks. You measure time in like block number. And therefore, it's kind of a bit of a tricky thing to order things properly and to reconcile different things happening at the same time. And they're both limited to only 15 transactions per second, which is crazy. Like we could do 15 transactions now between us, and like that's 1 second's worth of block of time then used up. Scale this up massively, you can see why it becomes a bidding war to get transaction space. Solana is fast and also cheap. Like cheap here is gas. Gas is this concept of effectively a transaction fee you pay to miners. This transaction fee both is the cost of using the computing power of the network and also the cost of using the prioritization cost of having your transaction mined, i.e. be confirmed by the network. Solana is cheap and Solana is fast. It's also this thing called single shard, which some of you will know what this means. Sharding is basically this idea that, and ETH 2.0 does it, NEAR does it, Zilliqa does it, of basically trying to do lots of transactions, breaking the network up into shards, different elements, to try and do stuff concurrently. Again, you've got to reconcile the shards. It's also really hard to do. Solana is single shard, so it's kind of very simple in that respect. Its architecture enables transactions to be ordered as they enter the network rather than by block, which some of you will know what this kind of means. In a simple sense, we can just rather than taking a ton of transactions all in one block and then having to figure out kind of where they go in which order, we can just do things transaction by transaction. But proof of history therefore becomes a cryptographic way to reliably order transactions, which sounds like me reading off the page, but the result is no problem of agreeing on time and instant finality. Now, again, the actual specifics of this, we'll talk about sharding a little bit later, and we'll talk about mempool a bit later, is that proof of history is not a consensus mechanism. Solana still uses the thing called proof of stake. Any of you that know about kind of Ethereum versus Bitcoin versus other chains know that proof of stake is effectively a system whereby your reputation as a miner is linked to what stake you put down rather than the work you've done. Proof of work is what Ethereum uses now and what Bitcoin uses. Ethereum is moving away from proof of work to proof of stake. Problem with it is that a lot of people end up having wasted time doing transactions when doing computational exercises that cost energy, which seems a bit of a waste of energy and kind of has climate concerns. Instead, you just have people do they're completely right. That should not say proof of stake. So what we're actually going to do is change it right now. Good spot there. But proof of history, again, is effectively an add-on to proof of stake in Solana's case. Solana doesn't actually use blocks for this reason in the same way that Ethereum does. It's instead blocks in the Solana sense are broken down into smaller batches of transactions known as entries, and the blocks in Solana are just sequences of entries that validators, like miners in a more traditional sense, vote on to achieve confirmation. So kind of different way of doing things, ordering things to try and be faster. Now, I think it's always important to note, especially when you have an Encode event, is that we don't try and be too dogmatic about what is right. Go and try it for yourself. Go into the weeds. We are trying to lead you to certain patterns of learning, but we're not trying to lead you to specific results. There are lots of blockchains trying to do lots of things and lots of very, very smart people trying to achieve them. So I think everything you should always interrogate for yourself. We're just trying to present the facts as they are reported by the chains themselves, and with our own kind of little bit of Gulfstream as well. Very good. Just in order to give you the taste to go and look at things more deeply in your own time. Validators within Solana's proof of stake are entities responsible for coming if these entries are valid. And this should be fairly obvious to anyone that understands validating. There are other optimizations. Gulfstream is one of them. Well done, Marco. We're going to talk about them later. But this is kind of one of the main kind of substantive differences on the consensus side, this proof of history stuff, that you really need to integrate. It's really hard. The way Solana is set up, I think, as from a developer experience stance, which we're going to talk about next, is the kind of big thing, and also why Solana development is quote unquote very hard. And there's a quote we're going to deal with now that we're going to, I think, unpicks this. So what is being traded against the developer is your time and your sanity. Much complexity that Solana requires to achieve the transaction speed it does is simply placed on your doorstep. This is both an opportunity and a cost. You have many more tools in your arsenal with Solana. You can be much faster for this reason, but much like Rust itself, it's much harder to use. And again, I think it's like, for me, it's a nice way of thinking about it is Solana at its most basic level is like a sports car. It's terrible to drive if you don't know how to drive it. You got to like use manual. You've got to kind of really wrestle with the car. But when like you get it right, it's like beautiful, fast, powerful, exciting. But you've got to wrestle with it to begin with, and you've got to really understand how to drive it. So as a new developer, this is something you should bear in mind. There are ways to abstract the complexity, and well done, James, mentioning Anchor. Anchor, we'll talk about in a moment, is effectively an abstraction on top that's very Solidity-based. If you want the full experience of Solana, you will need to use Rust. In our Solana course, we do teach Rust, so our bootcamp course. But yeah, Solana, you do, if you want to really kind of drive the sports car, use Rust. If you want I don't know how to do the analogy. If you want the comfortable saloon, Anchor is very good as well and allows you to achieve all the things, but maybe without having the full power of the engine and the full cornering ability, braking ability, if I stretch this analogy any further. Anchor, as I say, is a similar experience to developing Solidity. It's a framework that makes Solana's programs for Solana smart contracts more intuitive. If you want to dig in more, please just a basic Google, and you should be able to find everything you need to know about Anchor development. Rust is powerful. It's hard though, and there's not many Rust developers, but once you get the hang of it, it's absolutely fantastic. We have an event on both Rust and Anchor coming up later in this series. So Rust was chosen, for those who do know Rust, and we're getting a bit technical here, was chosen as the programming language since it offers kind of safety guarantees, effectively. And again, these for you as the developer, you don't have to worry too much about this. It's just a choice. Obviously, the Rust aficionados and people that are kind of used to low-level computing and quite complicated computing will be quite familiar with Rust and understand this choice, especially when you're dealing with a blockchain where security concerns are very high. We're going to talk about various aspects of Solana, keywords. I'm not really expecting you to retain all of these, but I think it's important to know and compare this. Bootcamp to be very good, and compare this to what we, I guess, traditionally used to in Ethereum. So let's dig into the weeds. So the Solana cluster is a set of validator miners working together to serve client transactions and maintain the integrity of the ledger. In English speak, it's just a set of validators. And almost, if you're used to Avalanche, kind of similar to the subnet situation. For those of you that kind of know those, they can coexist. They don't have to know each other. But it allows effectively for validators to club together in order to achieve certain things on the network, which again has quite big possibilities for those of you that are so inclined. For the day-to-day user, you don't need to worry about this. What we do care about is these things called programs and accounts. So a smart contract in Solana is a program. A smart contract in Solana is a program. This is very important. And accounts are not what you would think. So the biggest practical difference is that between Solana and Ethereum, Solana aggressively separates the code with the data. Programs are stateless contracts. Again, they don't have state. And there's nothing like class variables or globals like in Solidity. Again, we're aggressively separating code and the data, again, to make it run faster. Accounts are basically just buffers. They're owned by the system program by default, and the accounts are where we actually store data and state. So they're not like accounts in the traditional sense. An advantage of this is that you can then basically have generic programs that operate where kind of the different outcomes we have depend on what data you kind of put in. And again, we're trying to build easier building blocks to build applications later. For instance, what we might look at we will look at in future weeks is the SPI token program. In this, you don't even need to deploy code. You just create an account that mints tokens and receives them. You're using basically one contract. And the mint address is uniquely determined for token type. And the second bit I'm not going to get into because we're starting to get very technical. But the key bit is it's a very different way of doing development. That if you're used to Ethereum, and again, Anchor abstracts some of this, but if we're used to Ethereum, this is a sea change. So that should be said out loud to begin with. There's also these things called program-derived addresses. They are like home to accounts designed to be controlled by a specific program. Again, just whetting the appetite. And for some of you, this will mean a lot. Some of you, this will mean absolutely nothing and think, why am I going to the weeds of this? This is just, again, to give you a bit of a taste if you are technically minded. Programs can programmatically signed from certain addresses that need prime key. We're not getting into that now. But ultimately, one of the things we're trying to achieve is also composability of Solana apps as well. This is extremely important. You've also got these things called transactions and instructions. Instruction is a call into a program, and one or more instructions can be bundled into a message, and a message plus an array of signatures constitutes a transaction. Again, not too dissimilar, but should be kind of said out loud. This does have huge consequences. It can be very tricky. So just kind of bear in mind this when you are later developing. Again, if you're just here for non-technical reasons, don't worry about any of this. The take-home message is like things are trickier in Solana, it may kind of have consequences. This is just a taste. There are other innovations. Some of you have kind of discussed these. You've got Tower BFT, which is basically effectively a different version of proof of history optimized version of Byzantine fault tolerance. Again, I think it's important to know these innovations. They are more of a, how do I say, innovations rather than, or improvements rather than necessarily like hugely groundbreaking things. I think proof history is hugely groundbreaking. These are kind of nice to have. And you've also got Turbine, which is a block propagation protocol. Again, we'll talk about that in later weeks. Gulfstream, we mentioned that as a mempool-less transaction forwarding protocol, which has consequences for MEV. For those who are interested in MEV, we actually also have an MEV hackathon coming up soon. For those who want to kind of dig into the weeds on that. We have C-level, which is parallel smart contract runtime. We have pipelining, a transaction processing unit for validation optimization. We have cloud breaking, which is horizontal scaling accounts database. We have archivers, which is distributed ledger storage. And this is, again, we haven't even talked about ecosystem, which quite frankly is one of the most important innovations. I think innovation is, again, the thing we started with, the fervency of the community in Solana, I think is one of the key motivations to get involved, despite the difficulty. And we will now kind of look into, let's see if that link's not going perfectly, so I'll just load up my other screen. We'll now look into some of the ecosystem itself. And again, this is when a lot of you will start remembering things. See if I can, come on, there we go. We've got, most of you will be extremely aware of Serum. One of the biggest, let's see if we can go directly in. One of the biggest exchanges, that's not the right Serum. Crypto project is badly named. One of the biggest dexes, the biggest dex on Solana. Extremely powerful, extremely good, extremely fast. Yeah, Dogecoin, let's not shield Dogecoin. You've got Radium as well. There's like slight misspelling there, Rohan. Which is also fantastic. We've got, if we go back, there's proper Serum. We've got Step N. Most of you will know about that at the moment. It's a very popular project that is doing extremely well, which is sort of Move to Earn. Also, a nice GameFi project. So that is one good one as well. We have Mango, Apricot, all of these, most of these projects have been funded in the last year. We're rebuilding effectively the DeFi ecosystem of Ethereum over on Solana and trying to improve on it, make it faster. Marco is dropping some brilliant links in his chat, and hopefully we'll have some of these teams come and talk to you directly about how they built their project and key things you should know and reasons to get excited. But the amount of companies within the Solana ecosystem is quite extraordinary, the amount of startups, and I think this should be when you actually compare it to most other ecosystems, Solana is extremely, extremely advanced. Again, I would say only behind Ethereum at this point, which is credit to a few things. One, despite the, again, complexity of building, lots of stuff gets built, which I think shows you it's possible. The quality of dev support, I think the Solana team with themselves admit that the documentation isn't amazing and could be improved, and programs like this are very important in that respect. But the quality of dev support is outstanding, led by Chase and the team are there. So I think they are extremely hands-on when you're launching a project in making sure you get the support you need to go to the next level. So ecosystem, I think, is one of the key reasons you should be considering Solana if it's a case of consideration. And regardless of the technical side, I think the amount of projects that are getting involved, and again, it is crypto, so speculation does power things a long way. But I think the most important thing is there is a huge hive of developer activity, and you can kind of see this also in this chat today, which is absolutely fantastic. Some great resources. So here are the resources that I can paste now. So the general docs are pretty good. I think they're better on development than kind of background about Solana. So I've just dropped that into chat. Pretty good, but for kind of development, again, excellent, but maybe for general explanation, not very good. The post I mentioned before I now have is this one. It's excellent. It's terribly formatted, maybe that's the point, and apologies for the questionable language, but I think it gives a nice overview. I've borrowed some things from my talk today. It gives a nice overview of Solana that I think you can use. That's a nice one from Marco, which is fairly old now. It's about 3 years old, but it also shows you that Solana hasn't just come around yesterday. David, no, you don't. You can learn Anchor. We'll talk about that later. But again, we talk about these innovations we talked about here, talk about proof of history. So it's a very nice article, Marco. Thank you very much for that. And there's another one I wanted to reference, if I can find it. Solana Summer, which is excellent as well. This was written last summer. Again, there's a little bit of a, I'll paste this up. A little bit of a time lag on some of these, but I think most of them still apply. And there's another fantastic one that we'll get into later by Nader David, which is the full guide to full stack Solana development. But I think some nice reading material to come on with for next week, because next week is the more technical overview of Solana. So we've done a taste of stuff today. Let's go more into it next week. We're not getting into any coding yet. We're trying to understand the technical architecture of why choices were made and how that should affect what you do. So that is my general introduction to Solana in 40 minutes. What I will do now is open the floor for questions, and we can go from there, really. But thank you very much for your attention so far. So let's take some questions.
Looks like we got one from Oliver. He's got his hand up.
Oh, we're doing it face to face. Oliver, wow, go.
Hey, Anthony, thanks for the presentation. So my question is, what's your take on, for developers getting into blockchain, Solidity versus Solana? You know, obviously there's pros and cons, but just wanted to hear your quick take on it.
Solidity is much easier,
Okay.
by far. I think the case of, like, would you rather drive a Ford Focus or drive a? This sounds really bad. It's not quite that. It's like, would you rather drive like an automatic or a manual? I think that's the way. Like, automatics are really good these days. Manuals probably let you go to the next level. If you come from a traditional JavaScript background, Solidity is fine and understandable, and there's a lot of developer resources around there. If you're going to go Solana route, you have 2 options. You have Anchor, which is fairly Solidity based, so I recommend either coming from a JavaScript background or a Solidity background into Anchor, and that's a nice, easy way to go. If you want the full power of Solana, and most of the kind of very complicated stuff is built in Rust. Rust really hard. I recommend you being quite an experienced software developer. So it really depends what background you're coming from. But pound for pound, I think Solidity is kind of easier, mainly because I think there's more resources available there. But luckily, the experience on Anchor is extremely comparable. So why not try both for yourself? What we haven't talked about today at all is things like, obviously there's a lot of stuff in the Solana ecosystem about it sometimes going down, which is obvious with networks kind of new. So maybe that's also a consideration that you should always think, that sort of reliability. But my TLDR is, it is easier on Ethereum. Better? Who knows? But I think it's fairly comparable on the Anchor side, that I think are fairly negligible. But if you really want to go hardcore on Solana, it's harder, but you get much more bang for your buck. Marcus, you can also use C for C++. Yeah, that's really hard. Does that answer your question, Oliver?
Yeah, it does. And in terms of like the growth, do you see the growth going more and more in the Solana direction, given the fact that it's harder, but it sounds like there's a lot of momentum in that space now?
Yeah, you would think because it's so much harder that like people would like do it, but that's not the case. I think a few data points here, again, 3 data points. Number of projects built to kind of startups is quite extraordinary. I can say this from an investor point of view. A lot of the funded stuff is in the Solana ecosystem. Maybe it's developers following money. I don't know. 2, the conference last year was huge. Again, maybe you could take a conference with a pinch of salt. There's many reasons why a conference could be big. And kind of 3, the hackathons are extremely popular. We look at the fundamental data. So I don't think it's the tide is changing. There's obviously other blockchains, the likes of the Avalanches, the Polkadots, the Nears, the Algorands, the Polygons. Again, have each of their merits. And we would say I think Solana has a fairly good moat, although there are other Rust-based protocols. Polkadot on the substrate side, Near is Rust-based, Terra is Rust-based. I'm missing 1 or 2 out. The difference is actually Solana is really opinionated on its use of Rust as well. So maybe that's a moat. That doesn't imply growth. It just implies that developers will be fairly sticky. But it depends why one goes to Solana in the first place. What's your background?
I've worked more with Solidity so far, but I've done some C++. So I think Rust would be an interesting next step for me. So yeah, that's why I'm kind of moving in that direction.
Very good. Again, I think you're doing the bootcamp as well. I was just told me on Discord. So I think, again, the good thing is Anchor, it doesn't give you everything,
right?
But it gives you a lot to kind of have fun with Solana. The Rust is a big kind of what are my thoughts on Cardano? Rust gives you, I think, it's a big investment.
Right.
There's so few Rust developers, but again, it's much harder as well. So hopefully during the bootcamp you can kind of play around with all of it. But the worst case scenario is you end up building on Anchor, which uses your Solidity background.
Right.
And you can still do quite a lot, really.
Awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. Great questions. What are my thoughts on Cardano? I don't offer investment advice. I will say that. I think, unfortunately, Cardano has despite the technology, has a fairly bad association with speculation. And unfortunately, we've not done a deep dive on it. It's not a partner of ours. So, yeah. How do you think ETH 2.0 will impact Solana? It's a really tricky one. So ETH 2.0 should increase the transactions per second to 100,000. Whether it will or not remains to be seen. I think Solana is 65,000 right now. ETH 2.0 has sharding. I think in the analogy we used earlier is still that I kind of clunkily also was explaining to Oliver of like, it's a different experience. You're given more control in Solana, but it's harder. So, and they make opinionated choices, and maybe eventually the chains coexist. Maybe one wins. Again, it's unclear at this point. There's a lot in the air, but I think Solana is here to stay. So Haskell's also really hard. For those of you mentioning, Haskell is a very hard language as well. So I think that's unclear. But I think, again, this moat is argument is and people who use Solana love Solana. So if you can get it, if you can understand Rust, you can get into it. I think you might not never turn back. Do you think the network going down so often is a major red flag? Why do you think so much in the ecosystem compared to others like Avax? I think there's a time thing factor there. Obviously, we've worked a lot with Avalanche. They're good friends of ours. Encode is a cross-chain community. Avalanche is newer by about 3 years. So that's one factor there to bear in mind. It is a red flag. It's an orange flag. It's a flag. I don't think it's terminal. I think it's happened with networks. And we can maybe unpick it later. Investors, again, I speak for myself. I think I've personally invested, was an angel in 6 or 7 Solana projects now. I'm following developer activity, and it's very clear that developer activity is on Solana, always growing massively on Solana. So you can kind of will yourself into existence if there's enough willpower, there's enough money, all the problems will be figured out. So I don't think the market is reflecting any red flags. I don't think developer activity. I think there's a moat, so I wouldn't be too worried moving forward. But great question.
Antonio, another question. So all these new codes, so Solana is new language and all the indexes are written from scratch, all the DeFi is written from scratch. It seems like there will be lots of bugs and occasions for hackers. Has there been many hacks? Like except
does anyone know the big one? Yeah, does anyone know the big hack? What's it called?
There was
big hack on Solana is?
There was wormhole, yes, was a breach. But do you know about other ones, or was this the only one?
I not naivety here. I'm not aware of other ones. I'm sure there were other ones. Wormhole is the big one. Yeah, we can. That's a little bit beyond my pay grade to explain that. Casio, people are mentioning as well. Thank you very much. I love how engaged this chat is. This is like a very knowledgeable, engaged chat. Makes I think bodes really well for future sessions as we go deeper into the weeds. Yeah, Casio, which is a fairly recent one as well, which I'll put into chat. So yeah. I didn't get the first bit of the question, Fox, but yeah, there have been other hacks. I look, personally, again, I think it's good. I think that the language is good. We wouldn't be doing this series if it wasn't the case. Rust is great. Its opinion on Rust is really interesting and I think powerful. You can do incredible things. The quality of applications is fantastic. Developers do love it when they get into it. There's always teething problems. In simple time terms, it itself is a few years behind Ethereum in terms of time needed to kind of build up the tooling, the developers involved, the developer resources. Whether that continues in the future, who knows? All I can say is I think if you do either have an inclination on the Anchor side or the Rust side, you'll have a really great time. Yeah. Thanks, Fox. Guys, feel free to chime in person live questions. Otherwise, I'll keep going with the chat. Let's have a look. ETH sharding is always miles away, of course. What's the deal with bots hitting RPCs and signs? Does it been a long-term issue with transactions piece? Unfortunately, I don't know the answer there. Maybe someone in chat can help. Do you think Elon Musk control the crypto world? He does tend to, doesn't he? But does anyone really control anything these days? This is a really good, fantastic stuff. James has dropped in on the Rust side. I'm going to repaste those. Keep going through chat. Solana mempool we'll cover later. Omar, I'm just going to cover again. So proof history is proof history is kind of the wrong term. Solana still uses proof of stake. It just uses proof of history as effectively this chronological this sense of time on blockchain. It's not a consensus mechanism. It's not particularly helpful in that case. I don't know. It's 2.5 Solana. If I knew that, I'd be far more prophetic man. So all I do know is 2.0 does take a long time. So Solana's here now, but I don't really have a strong view. I believe in a cross-chain universe. as a payment gateway now is sort of, I mean, depends, like, what do you mean, a crypto payment gateway? Obviously, as a fiat payment gateway, that doesn't rely on crypto. And gateways aren't really don't really have to do with, yeah, I know what you kind of mean. You mean, can it replace kind of Visa? Again, that's a fiat problem, an onboarding problem. I hope all of you saw the news, or maybe some of you saw the news about the UK announcing kind of new regulations, which was really cool. Basically, paving the way to use stablecoins as payment. Awesome, I'll paste that in. Well done, the UK. Phantom's fantastic as well as a wallet. If anyone wants to use it, it kind of feels more intuitive than MetaMask. Excellent. Any other questions, guys? Otherwise, we'll see you next week. We have our technical overview, so a bit more technical, a bit more in depth. Love the audience, love the questions, all extremely strong. So if you have any questions, you can find me. I'll drop my email into chat as well. Do give us a follow on Twitter. If you've been to this event, tweet us out, and we'll be happy to retweet you. Dropping my Twitter in again there. We've also got Steve and Laura from the Encode team here as well. Discord is probably also a very good place to find us, but in all respects, you can find us, and we look forward to chatting to you and seeing you go on to do fantastic things. Otherwise, guys, have a wonderful evening, afternoon, morning, wherever you are, and see you all soon.